this meeting of the Sustainability Board to order. It is Monday, June 2nd, and Emma, please take the roll call.
Margie Davey.
Here.
Lisa Moore.
Here.
Jacob Claymeyer.
Here.
Alyssa Renke.
Here.
Vic Oliver.
Here.
Jaden Zern.
Here.
Paul Trader.
Here.
And Brad Spanbauer.
Here.
8 present. We have quorum.
Thank you. If anybody would like to make a public comment, now would be the time to do so. Is there anybody who would like to say anything, address us tonight? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes from the May 5th meeting. I would take a motion for that.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor of approving the minutes as written, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Emma for election of officers.
Great. So we need to elect a chairperson. I will call for a nomination 3 times. We will then have a motion to close the nominations and vote. So at this time, I call for nominations for chair.
So Sarah here.
We don't have. No nominations?
So awkward.
I don't know what to do with no nominations.
Call second and third.
Any other nominations
No.
for chair?
Did somebody nominate somebody?
Ahead of
Okay.
time? Not that I know of. I nominate Margie to continue if she will accept it.
Then you need a second.
Any other nominations for chair?
I second Margie for chair.
Third and final time, any other nominations for chair? Motion to close nominations and elect Margie Davey as chair by calling the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Don't hesitate.
All right, carried 8-0.
Thank you, Margie.
All right. So now I will call nominations.
For vice chair.
Yes, 3 times for vice chair. At this time, I call nominations for vice chair.
I nominate Vic Oliver.
Any other nominations for vice chair? Third and final time, any other nominations for vice chair? Right. So a motion to close nominations and elect Vic Oliver as vice chair by calling the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Great, carried 8-0.
Okay, we don't have to shift seats then. The next thing up is sustainable activities and events. And I just want to caution you with this. This is a list of events that are coming up, and Jake does a beautiful job of laying them out, and we've been adding to them, but what we cannot do is have any discussion on them. It's just notifications. So go ahead with the announcements you have, Jake.
Yeah, I don't have quite as many as I did last month. It was a good Earth month there, but the ones that I know about are always we have a slow roll in Oshkosh. It's a biking event for biking awareness, and it's a family-friendly event. You can find those events on Facebook. Something that I really enjoy is the You Pick Strawberries. It's a farm out up on the out past Barebones that is happening starting on the 13th, at least according to the schedule. Also, let's see. Those are the ones that I have just for this month. So if anybody else has any they'd like to share, welcome.
Does anybody know of anything else going on?
Farmers market starts pretty soon.
It's-
Next week? This
Starts
coming weekend?
Saturday, yep. Every Saturday morning
Every
downtown
Saturday.
from 8 to 12:30.
We want to promote that.
Yes, we definitely do.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody have anything else? Okay, then, we'll move on. Tonight we have not one, but two presentations. We're so lucky. And I want to thank Kelly Ryer from the Winnebago County Solid Waste for coming and giving us her presentation on composting and bulk waste. It is quite amazing. I've seen it before, and I hope everyone enjoys
All right.
and learns lots.
Thank you for having me. Hopefully I won't disappoint you too much. I don't have the full, like, this is how recycling works in our area. I would love to come back a different time and talk you all through that. But I did want to specifically, mainly three things. I want to talk about what we do at our facility. And then I wanted to address the composting and the bulk waste pickup that came out of your last meeting. So I'm Kelly Ryer, and I've been with the solid waste department for about 1.5 years now. And I know several of you here through different reasons, so I'm glad to be with you tonight. So first I'm going to talk about what the solid waste department does. So that's our mission statement. You can read that. But a couple of things that I wanted to point out right away is that a lot of people don't realize that Winnebago County, our department, our solid waste department, is not on the tax levy. We are the only department that is not on the tax levy, so we don't directly get taxpayer dollars to fund our programs. We are considered an enterprise fund. So all of our how we cover our programs comes from tipping fees, whether that be a recycling truck dumping, a garbage truck dumping at our transfer station, or residents coming in and disposing of different items. So, you know, as a lot of people don't know that, so I just wanted to put that out there. And it essentially works as like the people paying for it are the ones using it, which is really great. And with that, we can't just start up random programs. They have to be sustainable. They have to be something, we have to be able to cover the costs. So I just wanted to put that out there. On the bottom you see Tri-County Recycling. So essentially we are friends in Winnebago County with Outagamie and Brown County. Because all of our recycling goes to one spot, we share the Tri-County Recycling facility, and so we work together to strategize outreach and other recycling messages because they're all the same messages. We're all friends. All right, so what is going on at our facility? That building on the top left is our transfer station. I mean, before I started, I really didn't even know what that was. I was like, why are trucks just like moving trash around? It's because we have a closed landfill. So that big hill that you see off of Jackson Street opened in 1989 and closed in 2013. It is monitored, and by DNR law has to be monitored for at least 30 years and longer if something's discovered. So it's closed. We don't have an open landfill in Winnebago County, but we monitor the closed one that we have. And now we have a transfer station. So if you live in the city of Oshkosh, which I'm assuming you all do, you put your trash and garbage, or your trash and your recycling on the curb, it gets picked up, and you might not think about it ever again. After that, the trucks bring it out to us at the transfer station. They tip it on the floor. That's what you can see happening in the lower photo on the left. I think, yeah, that is trash. But one side of the building has trash, one has recycling. From there, it gets loaded into huge semis that compact the material in it, and then from there, our garbage and our recycling both go up to Outagamie County. So that is on one side of County Road Y. On the other side is our office building, but it is also our residential drop-off area. I'm going to talk more about that. So this is what it looks like. It's beautiful. The trucks tip it onto the floor, our loaders put it into the hopper, and then that gets loaded into the trucks. So we're dumping it and reloading it, setting it to Outagamie County. That's what mixed recycling looks like. And on average, we receive about 13 to 16 recycling trucks every day. And that includes like City of Oshkosh, City of Neenah, but also our private haulers like GFL and Harders. And those haulers are picking up from companies as well as like apartment buildings. So other things that we offer for the public is generally we accept trash. So we accept bulky trash. If you have a truck full of, you know, furniture and garbage and mattresses, you can bring it out there, and our fees are relatively minimal. But we also have other things that we want to separate out from the trash, and we also have a place for people to put those as well. So things like Freon appliances, non-Freon appliances, scrap metal, tanks, like propane tanks, e-waste. We often hear about like the e-waste events, which are great, but just know that we accept e-waste year-round, anytime we're open. Tires, 99-point-something% of every tire actually gets recycled into something new, which is fabulous. Bulbs, fluorescent bulbs. We also accept used cooking oil, batteries. There's probably more. These are the ones I'm highlighting, and then we also have household hazardous waste collection events that this year they are running from May through October. There's no cost for household hazardous waste disposal, but appointments are required. All right, so I just wanted to touch on the MRF, or the Material Recovery Facility. That's essentially our recycling facility. It opened in 2009, and again, this is in Appleton, so this is where our recycling is going to. So it actually handles a lot of material, not just Brown, Outagamie, and Winnebago, but outside that area as well. So we service about 16% of Wisconsin's population, and we're currently processing 80,000 tons per year. 11.3% is our residual rate. So residual means that out of all the recycling material that goes to the facility, 11.3% of it ends up going to the landfill. And that is for a variety of reasons. The biggest one being whatever it is doesn't belong in the recycling facility. It's trash, it's potatoes, it's shoes, it's giant stuffed animals. So, but you name it, people will put it in their recycling bin because, you know, it magically gets recycled on that. So, but we are still far below the average residual rate of 15 to 20%. All right, so composting outreach in Winnebago County. We're fans of composting. We promote it. We've sold bins to people like Alyssa. And so we did compost bin sales in last year. And I was asked if we wanted to do that again this year. Based on interest from the community, I said, let's hold off a year. So right now the plan is to sell compost bins every other year. And to be honest, I have had 0 requests up until right now. Nobody's reached out saying, hey, do you still have those? So that's kind of telling as well. And then, you know, through social media, we promote composting, the importance of it, and you know, just reducing waste and keeping it out of the landfill. So current composting options in Winnebago County is backyard residential. There is the option, there are companies, private companies, that will do like household pickup. And then we do offer yard waste drop-off at our site. I mean, the city of Oshkosh does as well. So that's going to be like mostly your browns. Of course, you're not going to put food scraps in with your yard waste. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that we don't have composting options in Winnebago County. And at our facility, we do not have the space, the staff, the equipment, or any of that to set up an operation. So I just wanted to make sure that is clear. But potential future operations. Do you like the first one?
Sure do.
Reinstate the digester in Oshkosh. That's really cool. But then there's the option of, like, instead of a county program, but a city program. And then, of course, there is always the option of public and private partnerships. But again, right now, we don't have that ability at our site. And then I just learned about the electric composting bins. I didn't even know that was a thing. And that is on my Christmas list. All right. So these are some of the considerations that you need to think about when you're looking into a composting operation. So there's different types of methods, and I want to also state that I am no way like an expert on composting at all. I know the basics. But there's the volume of material. Do we know, like, the entire city is on board? Do we know who in the city is interested? Would this be a whole county effort? So things to think about there. You'll also need staff. There's specialized equipment you would need to start an operation. Curing space, of course, regulatory requirements. and then land grading so that you don't have like pooling and bad smells and that sort of thing. So there really is a lot to think about. All right, moving on to bulk waste disposal. So again, at our facility, if you bring it into us, we will gladly accept it. Our minimum fee right now is $20 for the first 700 pounds of trash. So pretty minimal. But, you know, like I believe, Alyssa, you mentioned in the last meeting that, you know, not everybody has access to a truck or are physically able to move bulky items. So a lot of cities recognize that, and they have these bulky waste disposal events, and they're different from each other. I'm just highlighting two here. The city of Appleton has one, and it runs April through September. I believe it's every other week you can put 2 bulky items onto the curb for pickup, which is really cool. But, you know, contamination is always an issue with everything when it comes to disposal. So they have a great list of what's approved and what is not approved on there. And then City of Milwaukee also has their Clean and Green program. Similar idea, but theirs is different. It's like they have a calendar, and if it's your neighborhood's week, that's how it happens. So there's different ways of doing it, but again, considerations would be cost. Who is paying for this? Like, where is the funding come to? You know, there is certainly a cost when it comes to collecting and disposing of bulky items. How frequent are you going to do it? What is your approved and not approved list going to look like? Does the community have extra staff in order to pick up these materials? And then, you know, what if somebody didn't put it out on time and now you just have like trash laying all over the curb, the aesthetics and complaints from neighbors, of course, contamination. And then also, if this were something you really wanted to pursue in the city of Oshkosh, you would have to work with us to make sure we're able to actually handle that much material all at once, or however it is you plan to do it. So I guess in conclusion, it is a great thing. Other communities are doing it. It's just something you might want to look into further and do some more research on. And we do get phone calls all the time. My garbage wasn't picked up, and we're like, we're not the people that pick up your garbage. We do not pick up garbage or recycling, and we don't give out bins, so that is not us. We're just the place where everybody takes their stuff to. So. All right, so this is actually just my last slide. So we are, you know, sustainability minded at Winnebago County Solid Waste. So some of the current things we're working on is we continue to do gas to energy conversion. Like, I don't have 2024's numbers in my head, but in 2023 it was enough power from the methane gas conversion to energy to power about 1,200 residential homes. We have Ken Roble Conservation Park. If you're not familiar with it, you should definitely go there and check it out. So that is a park that was essentially built at another closed landfill site, our Snell Road site, and it's really nice. And there's opportunity there to add more conservation efforts. So that would be a great partnership with like UW Oshkosh and other volunteers. It's a nice, peaceful place to go. And then we, like I mentioned earlier, we have all those beyond the bin recycling options for our residents. And then we also have a county-wide holiday string light recycling program. So Brown County and Outagamie County at their sites have a little bin for holiday string lights, but we took that a step further and we work with, I'd say most of the communities in Winnebago County, and they set up bins at their town and village halls. And so we picked up a ton of lights. And I just got the numbers the week before my vacation. This year we picked up 3,400 pounds of holiday string lights. It was a 54% increase over the previous season, so people were on it. I don't believe that that's people buying more lights and getting rid of them. It's just more people hearing about the program and being excited that there's a place to take them to get recycled. We are working with Fox Wolf, and we are rearing beetles for purple loosestrife biocontrol. We just got our beetles in there the other day, and we did that last year. That's our setup from last year, and I would like to point out that the 2 containers we pulled out of the trash to raise the beetles in.
Awesome.
Of course. And then we have lots of resource conservation and recycling outreach and education. That's my job. But we also have some online tools. We just we just completed the ABCs of Recycling Right book, and there's actually big plans for that to go to every third grade classroom in Winnebago, Brown, and Outagamie counties. The back page of every letter will have lesson plans for the classroom, and we're just working right now on finishing that up. And then so future things. Our director is really in favor of installing native plants. We have lots of grassed areas out there, and they're just asking for native plants. So that's one of our next things, and then we're also looking into goats for grazing, as well as invasive species control. So that's what I have for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Questions, anyone?
In regards to the compost, you say that you accept yard waste.
Yes.
What is then done with the yard waste that is brought there?
Yeah, so that is shredded. We have a big grinding machine, which is not called a grinding machine. Roto chopper, that's what it is. Because of, yeah, I got made fun of for that already. But so it's can only handle certain size material. So any branches bigger than 6 inches just literally won't fit in there. But that's your grass clippings and your leaves and your branches. So that gets ground up, and then we have a company come in that uses it as a soil amendment.
Do they pay for that material?
Nope, we pay them to take it from us.
Okay.
Paul?
I was going to ask, is this information some of that information that you shared with us available on the website, or how can we access that other than trying to remember what you told us?
Oh, I can certainly share. You can keep this.
It was included in our packet, actually,
Okay.
a section of it, and you'll always be able to watch this too on reruns.
I'm sure I looked at it, but this way it looked familiar, but double checking.
So a lot of the questions were like deep dives into like, what do we do with the composted material? So I didn't really feel like I needed to address those once I got it out there that we cannot start our composting program currently.
I had a question about your hazardous waste.
Yes.
You said it's no cost to households, but it's by appointment only.
Yes.
What if somebody shows up with something and they don't have an appointment? Do you just turn them away?
It's a great question.
I have been
We
told
have
people
not.
take it and dump it elsewhere then.
We have not. We've only had 2 events already this year. So twice in May. I don't even know what month it is. Twice in May, we had people come out. Each event only had 4 people that didn't have an appointment, and no, they did not get turned away. But we do require the appointments, just because in the past we would have certain days where like come anytime between 9 and 2 or whatever the times were, and everybody would come at 9 o'clock in the morning, and the traffic would back up onto the highway and cause issues. So appointments are just to spread that out over the time.
We don't want them backing up with hazardous materials.
No.
That's not a good thing.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay. So we'll have to, and no doubt you're promoting that too, but it's always good to know why. It
Yes.
helps people understand.
Yeah, definitely.
Did anybody else have any questions or comments?
I guess I'm just a little curious some more about the kind of connection between, so like in particular, what we were discussing last time was bulk waste disposal. So like the waste ultimately kind of gets transferred through you all, but really it's the city who's doing the pickup. So like how does that work, or what does that look like in terms of if we wanted to coordinate a bulk waste disposal pickup? What, in your opinion, where would be a good place to start?
I would first look into what kind of strategy other local communities are going with. Like timed when you're doing this. The city all at once is not going to work for anybody. So spreading that out, and then once you got funded, who's paying for it? That's like a big thing. Of course, we'll accept it, but it's also really important that people are putting out the right things. We don't want tires mixed in with their garbage or TVs or that sort of thing. So really a strong focus on education of what is accepted and not, who's going to pay for it, and what strategy works best for the city to spread that out so it's not inundating us all at once. But general waste, we accept that every single day that we're open.
Same question for composting, right? I understand you have to cover your costs and everything, but has there been any like studies on demand, or is that something that we should be bringing to you as like
Yes.
okay.
I was actually going to bring that up because I believe you talked about surveying. And so I don't have any data to share with you regarding, you know, how many people in the county are interested in composting. I know 18 bins were sold last year, so I got that, but that doesn't really tell us much. I am curious how many people are interested in it, so if that survey isn't completed or sent out yet, that would definitely, I don't know. Were you gonna do it? Was there a city survey?
I don't know, Emma, do you know?
I know we talked about it, but nothing
I don't
has
think
been
it's-
finalized. Yeah.
I think the thought was potentially if the sustainability plan had a survey, adding that question. But at some point, we might come up with our own survey or
Okay.
way to get that info out.
Yeah, that would be super helpful.
Jaden?
Yeah, I was just wondering from a diversion perspective. You mentioned that composting yard waste and whatnot has a cost associated with it to have a company come and take that material away. Roughly speaking, don't need exact numbers, but do you know in a year what that might cost?
No idea.
No idea.
I stay away from the numbers, and I'm closer to like making fun memes for social media. That's more my realm. But we don't accept it for free, so it's $10 for the up to 500 pounds for the first 500 pounds essentially. So again, a minimal cost, but that $10 is just again covering the staff time to grind it up, and then our cost of having somebody come pick it up for us. And any program that we run needs to be covered because again, we're not taxpayer funded.
If I may add a little bit to that, several of the programs, as you're asking questions, do fall under the Department of Public Works here in the city of Oshkosh. So a lot of our yard waste, we have the yard waste drop-off site. It's for residents, it's a $25 annual permit to take as much residential waste, whether it's branches, grass clippings, any of those things, and drop them off at the yard waste drop-off sites. We do also have a grinder that we run all of our woody material through, similar size restriction, 6-inch maximum diameter. We use a lot of that after they grind it up. They will actually put it back in the yard waste site for residents if they want to use it for mulch. And pretty much every weekend, the pile that we put out there on Friday is gone by Monday when we come back in. So a lot of it is taken that way. We have also been working with some companies. Just this past winter, we had a company from the Amherst area reach out to us and asked us about not only yard waste but also our fall leaf collection to see what goes on with that, to see if maybe there was an opportunity there to partner. So currently our fall leaf collection, we collect it short-term store it, and then it gets taken to a few different landscapers in the area that do composting. Composting does require a permit from the Department of Natural Resources. Many years ago, the city did do that with some of our leaf and yard waste. That permit has not been kept up, primarily because the locations that we were doing it at are being developed now. They were land within our industrial parks. So we've been partnering with other entities. Kelly brought up the former biodigester on the university. A lot of our yard waste, particularly grass clippings and things like that, were taken there while that was in operation.
James, when you say that the residents can pick up the mulch, do they have to have that drop-off permit in order to access the mulch?
That is a great question, Margie, that I unfortunately do not know the answer to.
Well, I'm sure you'll let me know.
Yeah, certainly follow up with me on that, because I know it's, as you go in, it's just literally right around the corner to the left, so I don't know if the attendants require that or not. I never had that one asked of me. I do know that we do not require permit for used motor oil and used antifreeze drop-off. We do take those at the yard waste drop-off site, and those do not require a permit to, it is still in the fence, you have to go past the attendant, but we do not require a permit to utilize those portions of the site.
It's good to keep them out of the lake, right?
Yes. And depending on where oil prices are, oil and diesel prices will depend on whether we have to pay somebody to take the used motor oil or they pay us to come get it. So it all depends on where those commodities are at the time.
Makes sense. Anybody else have any other questions for Kelly or comments?
I have a comment, perhaps. I think from what's been presented and what's been shared, I think there still is an opportunity here. There's both like the yard waste that we are taking, people are paying money to dispose of, right? And we are then taking that and having to export it. I think the city has a great solution, redistributing it back to the residents. But also, we have this other problem of food waste. All of the restaurants, all of the households, all the grocery stores, and so on that deal with food are throwing that in the dumpster right now. And it sounds to me like that is then brought to the transfer site and then transported to the landfill, where it'll then decompose anaerobically. And combining those two kind of problems and feedstocks into one, reduce the amount of transport that's required. It also creates a resource for our community that's of higher quality than just, wood chips, and could also, represent a source of income for, the different agencies that would potentially be involved in it, right? In selling the compost, but also just like our normal trash and recycling pickup costs money to have a bin, right, to dispose of your food waste. So I hope we can find, it sounds like some way through a survey to evaluate demand and then understand what space and other interested parties are available to work on this in the future. I mean, that's just my perspective on it, and so I just wanted to comment, but if anybody else has any other ideas, I'm welcome that as well. Yeah.
I do want to mention that before the biodigester closed, we were sending our yard waste there too. I don't know if it was all of it, but a lot of it. So we were pretty sad when it closed. So.
Okay, well, it sounds like we should put this on a future agenda for further discussion. Okay, thank you so much, Kelly. You're welcome to stay for our whole meeting if you'd like, but if you have to get home, you
It's a beautiful
understand.
evening. I'm gonna see myself out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so next on our agenda. Oh, you need to.
Chuck, go sit over there. The keyboard.
Next on our agenda, we have the Municipal Code Chapter 14, Post-Construction Stormwater Management Ordinance Update Analysis for discussion and action. And they are pretty much demanding we take action tonight, so we have to learn about this and discuss it. And we have with us James Robbie from the Department of Public Works, and we have Chuck, I'm sorry, I don't know your last name.
It's BAME, yeah.
We have Chuck Boehm from the consulting firm, right?
Correct.
And we'll let him give us his presentation.
All right, well, I appreciate that. And I know you did get a pack with a bunch of information already, so what I'm going to walk through tonight in this presentation is kind of a very abbreviated portion of that, so hopefully if you see I'm going too quickly, you have questions, please don't hesitate to stop me and ask. So we do want to make sure you have a good understanding of what we're asking for. So we've been working with city staff for a while now to look at potential updates to Chapter 14 of our Stormwater Management Code that's looking at post-construction stormwater management. And the particular aspect we're looking at is the water quality part of it. So we have quantity management, so flooding related pieces, and quality, the how much suspended solids and total phosphorus and the pollutants that are coming off of with our stormwater. So this particular study is focusing on the pollution aspects. There will probably be some fine tuning of the ordinance to deal with some other administrative components to kind of clarify what's being asked of folks that are under that ordinance, but the core focus is on the water quality aspects. We've been talking about this for a couple of years now. In fact, this body did submit a letter of support for the grant that was received by the city that partially funded this study. So appreciate your folks helping with that back then. And recently did do a Common Council workshop that was also televised. I believe you were provided with that as well if you had a chance to look at that. These are all essentially same themes and slides from that presentation. So hopefully it'll look familiar to you.
Could you clarify on the scope?
Yep.
In Chapter 14, does that include like residential buildings too? Like if somebody were to build a house, would that be subject to these same requirements?
Generally speaking, the requirements are coming in at either an acre of disturbance or 20,000 square feet of impervious surface on a parcel. So your typical single-family residential home will not be triggering those requirements. However, if the home is being built in a subdivision that was recently platted, the subdivision does have to provide management for the subdivision. So, if somebody comes in for, do a 20-lot subdivision, it's going to be over an acre. So while each individual lot doesn't have to do something while they build, the developer that's developing the subdivision does have to provide stormwater management for that development.
That helps. Great, yeah, great question, and that subdivision developer will kind of build the facilities necessary for the build-out, and, all the houses that will be coming in the future, so it's a great question. So as James pointed out, that, this code does go down to sites that have as little as 20,000 square feet of impervious surfaces, so your rooftops, your driveways, parking lots, that sort of thing, any combination of those. And it's a two-tiered requirement where redevelopment has to remove total suspended solids, which is what TSS stands for. So now there's the dirt, by 40% for redevelopment, and new developments, like that subdivision that James just alluded to a minute ago, they would be looking to reduce solids by 80%. So it's tiered depending on the type of development, whether it's new or redevelopment. And currently those are the water quality requirements that we do have. We don't have any other pollutants currently named in the ordinance. So the 40 and 80% kind of come to us from the DNR and the NR 151 and guidance that they were trying to address stormwater quality years ago before there were detailed studies available. Over time, the DNR has been studying watersheds of various nature throughout the state, and not too long ago, the Upper Fox and Wolf watersheds did get a TMDL developed. They were studied by DNR back in 2020, and they did establish goals for reducing not only TSS or sediment, but also phosphorus from the various discharges that came to either the Wolf River, Fox River, the various lakes and that are in that study. So we in the city have 4 major watersheds that are part of that study, which is the Fox River proper, Lake Winnebago, Lake Beatamore, and Sawyer Creek. And so each of those will have which we'll see in a moment, some reduction requirements, targets for them for TSS and TP or phosphorus. That study also did look at and analyze and does ask for reductions from other source areas, so agricultural is part of that as well. The industrial and, of course, the city's wastewater plant as well, from a sanitary sewage perspective, does have limits that are put onto it by this study.
It's important to note too, the entire Fox Wolf watershed is not covered under a single study. There was the lower Fox, which really starts at the Nina Menasha dams and goes to Green Bay, and then the upper Fox and Wolf kind of starts at those dams and goes upstream from there. So the Fox Wolf watershed is kind of split into 2 different studies that were done at 2 different times.
Correct. And this study will be worked into our next stormwater pollution WPDES permit. So in that permit right now that we are under, there are numerics and metrics from the prior studies. As James mentioned, the Lower Fox River, which was done previously before the last DNR permit was issued. In the next permit reissuance, we do expect that the target reductions from this TMDL study will be rolled into that, and will be noted that basically we're under those rule requirements now. So. In 2022, the city looked at an update to the citywide stormwater management plan, which was after the 2020 TMDL study was completed. And so we looked at how are we doing compared to those different performance metrics for TSS and TP reductions. So this table summarizes the different watersheds within the city, and on the left-hand side of that table are those TSS reduction targets. So you'll see that 3 of them are the same, the 20% stand, for the Lake Beatamore, Fox River, Lake Winnebago. So what that basically is saying is that that's not a huge problem as far as a water quality impairment goes. The sediment itself is not necessarily an issue for those particular water bodies. Sawyer Creek, on the other hand, is a little more sensitive to sediment loadings, and so there is a higher reduction target that is being asked of ourselves and anybody that's tributary to these waterways, in this case Sawyer Creek, to reduce TSS reduction by over 58%. So, which isn't an onerous number necessarily. However, a lot of that watershed is already built up, so we have some facilities in there already. As new development comes on board, they'll have to do a certain amount of reduction, and we're going to have to consider, like, what do we need to be asking them and ourselves to reduce and remove to help guide towards those numbers. So the second column is where are we currently? Again, those 3 kind of middle watersheds, we're doing quite well. We've been tackling stormwater management in the city for quite a while now, and the practices that are in place, and that includes street cleaning, catch basin cleaning, and all the stormwater ponds and other facilities that the city's built or private developments have built, have done a lot to pull out some of those sediment loads. Sawyer Creek is still a ways off, so we're roughly halfway there, and so we have a ways to go for that.
And one of the big challenges with Sawyer Creek is, it's a watershed of about 10,000 acres, only about a third of which is in the city limits. So it's the lower kind of about 3,000 to 3,200 acres that are within the city itself. The remainder of that is outside of the city limits upstream, which is rural and very agricultural in nature.
Chuck, could you go
Yes.
back to the previous slide with the
Sure.
map? And it's the turquoise area that we're talking about.
Correct.
this
Yes.
Sawyer
Right,
Creek,
yes, excellent, yes, right. So there's and again, whether it be ourselves or anyone else that's tributary to that, we all have the same requirements and same goals to try to achieve. We don't, because we're in the city, we don't get a more harsh or least restrictive goal. We're all treated the same. Phosphorus is a little bit different story, and the third column over are the reductions being asked for us by that TMDL study, which are actually quite significant. So 85.5 roughly percent reduction from the phosphorus that's being received by all those waterways today. I will say that from a technology standpoint, particularly for redevelopment, that's going to be extremely challenging. And the reason is that sediment, if you think about the dirt, sand, debris, that there's a granularity to it. It settles out pretty quickly in a lot of the different devices. Phosphorus has a much higher solubility portion to it, so some of it will settle out as particulates with the sediment. A lot of it, though, is dissolved in that water and gets much more challenging to pull out. So yes, some of it will come out with sediment, and the more you settle it, the longer you let it settle, it'll come down and be removed. It can be filtered as well, but you're now talking kind of a different level of treatment that often we have to deal with on the phosphorus side. So unfortunately, we're a little further off from our targets, and I would say, again, those are extremely challenging, and our goal is to just continue to make progress towards those numbers. We're not even asked to achieve any of those metrics tomorrow or any particular date in the future. It's been discussion, is it 5-year, 10 permit cycles, which are 5-year permits. So we're a ways off from having to achieve those numbers. But DNR does require us to make progress towards achieving those numbers, which is why we're looking at this study as potentially modifying our ordinance to be a part of the broad spectrum of things we want to do to start to move towards those numbers. I will point out the last line, and as James did also mention, that Lower Fox River TMDL, when we did this study, there's a very small portion on the far north of the city that's actually associated with the county that is the Fairgrounds area that is undeveloped right now. And that, when we figured out geographically where it stood from a topography standpoint, it's actually in the Nina Slough, which is part of the Lower Fox watershed. It just, when the DNR did their mapping, it wasn't even captured as that being the case. We're not really worried about that, because when that develops, they will have to meet those new development requirements. And so it'll basically develop its way into compliance, for lack of a better way to say it. So that's our challenge, to try to kind of move towards those target reductions. One of the things we did under this study was look at what are our neighbors doing, what are other peer communities doing. So I've got this table split up in two parts. The left side is peer communities or neighboring communities where they are using TMDL reduction targets in their ordinances, either in part or in whole. And on the right-hand side are communities that are still using those, say, 40 and 80% reductions, rather than changing over to TMDL type, metrics from a study. So roughly like half and half, I guess I'll say it is. However, two of those communities that we picked for peer communities, La Crosse and Eau Claire, don't actually have TMDLs that are really in effect in that area. So they obviously have no reason or even ability to move to a TMDL set of numbers if they don't have one in place at this point in time. So, but it does kind of give you a mix that not everybody is converting to TMDL numbers, and the city is certainly not necessarily going to jump into an 85.5% reduction. We feel it's maybe not even practical at this point. So,
Are those other communities going to be required to adopt those TMDL requirements similar to Oshkosh?
I'm going to guess that as the permit gets updated, the municipal separate storm sewer system permit gets updated, yes, if there are TMDLs in place, communities will have to move towards that as time comes. It's just at this point in time, they haven't been forced to, so they haven't needed to yet. And the current permit expired
April.
April of
24.
last year, I believe it was.
Correct.
So we're about a year past due, and we haven't really heard much from the DNR on where they're at status-wise on drafting the new permit. So it's a little behind schedule, not as far behind schedule as some of their other ones. They do have some permits that are more than 5 years removed from being updated. So, but with the WPDS permit system, when your permit expires, if a new one's not available, right away you continue to follow the requirements of the expired permit.
Correct. Yep. So then the next kind of question we're looking at is like, what are the different potential combinations of pollutant reductions we might ask ourselves and our developers to ultimately guide ourselves towards? So the current code is the top line, the 80 and 40% as we talked about earlier, as far as what our code currently asks for, and there are no total phosphorus reductions in the current code. Scenarios 1 and scenario 2 are actually developed as part of that citywide plan that we did, wrapped up in November of 2022. So those were already kind of combinations, if you will, that were considered back at that time. And all these different scenarios are based on either the TMDL reduction numbers, TMDLs in the area. Maybe we were looking and considering what a potential stormwater guidance is from DNR. It's like what type of, for instance, phosphorus can a particular practice remove. So we used a variety of different sources to inform ourselves of a combination of potential metrics that we would strive to achieve. So scenarios 1 and 2 were studied in the 22 study. 3, 4, and 5 were studied in this current piece of work that we're working on right now. And so that mix of combinations for scenarios where we looked at further and looked at some specific sites and how they would compare to that. So we're going to kind of jump into that next, but I didn't want to pass them without asking if there's any other questions on those metrics at this point.
I think the big thing to note there is you look at the last column, you don't see an 85.6% number anywhere in that column. It's because, as Chuck said, the technology just does not exist at this point in time to be able to reasonably get to that level. So as a part of what we analyzed, we looked at, okay, what levels of treatment are reasonably attainable with technologies that are available right now. We didn't feel it was appropriate to try to put a requirement in there that nobody could meet, and then every site would be, well, I can't meet it, so I'm trying to do the best I can. You know, the code and state law includes a maximum extent practicable, or MEP requirement. So if we put such a high number in that nobody could meet it, every site would have to be evaluated to see, okay, did you really do everything you could, or is there something more? So we looked at what do practices that are generally available now achieve, and we look to set the targets towards those practices that are currently available.
Yep, and there are some technologies that involve coagulants and essentially a wastewater treatment process that can achieve those 85% reductions for phosphorus, but extremely expensive. It just really is. We're not personally at this point in time ready to jump into something like that for our facilities, and we're not going to ask others to do it. So as James said, we're looking at what are the sort of reasonable technologies that can be employed, and planning to hold ourselves and our developers to those numbers. And there will still be an MEP, maximum extent practicable, if for some reason a site condition is very unique and they just can't quite achieve whatever numbers we select. So we did look at a variety of different sites. This is a slide looking at a series of redevelopment sites. The two on the top were two sites that were looked at in the 2022 citywide plan update, and the bottom three were looked at under this current study. The middle one in particular was looked at in a little more detail. The last two came up as follow-up to the Common Council workshop we had, and there was questions over, well, what about more recent developments and how are they doing? If we compared them to the different code scenarios that we're considering here. So, on that left-hand side are the different redevelopment sites by name, and also underneath that site is the TSS and TP reductions that site is achieving based on the plan that was submitted to the city at the time, or in this case for like CP Otter parking lot that was developed by the city at the time. So all those sites are and were in compliance with the codes at the time. Now we're comparing them across the columns to like scenario 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How would they fare if we had those in place at that time that sites were developed. So we found kind of a mixed bag. So basically, about 5 out of the total 25 potential boxes are yeses. So roughly 20% of the sites in the various scenarios and the various locations would have been in compliance with a reformulated or an updated ordinance set of numbers. If we look at the yeses and the partials, we're more in the 70%. So I think, depending on the site and what we found, each site is very unique. They may be in compliance already, say if we chose scenario 3, for example. Some might only partially be in compliance if that was the criteria that was in effect at the time the development took place. So those 2 middle ones, the field operations and Freddy's, might have to do something a little more to try to achieve those reductions. Whereas we found that scenario 4 appeared to be pretty challenging for a redevelopment site. And again, we weren't necessarily asking them all to reach too hard, and 72% is quite a good jump in phosphorus compared to the 40% that they're currently under. So it's a mix of what was the ask in the scenario and also the site conditions in effect. So
Would those developments, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Would those developments need to be changed if this ordinance were changed?
They would not, no.
Yeah, I feel like you're comparing their current, compliance to our current, standard, and they designed their, filtration systems to our current standard. So to me, it makes sense that any, increase in the requirements, they may fall out of compliance, or rather, future designs would need to be designed to a more stringent standard.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep, and DNR wouldn't ask us to go back and, your pond or whatever facility was not designed to the criteria for today. We aren't going to be asking ourselves to necessarily go, we will if it makes sense to retrofit those, but yeah, we'll not be asking these sites to hey, pick it up a notch, we've changed our minds, So that is exactly the case, right? They will still remain in compliance. We're just kind of comparing the sites to the what-if scenarios.
Yeah, the biggest point of the exercise was to see, okay, with these scenarios and the practices that those sites put in place, do they meet them, or would they maybe have had to do something different if this was the requirement when they developed?
Correct. Well, let's see the question.
Just a slight clarification. So
Yes.
for example, like the Theta Care one where it says partial and then TPO,
Yes.
Is that partial sediment removal but full phosphorus removal?
Did they meet the scenario or not? So it's a yes, they met both the TSS and TP, or no, they didn't meet the TSS or the TP, and partial means they met one or the other.
Okay, and then with the parentheses, for example, like scenario 1 for that last Theta Care option would
They
be?
met the phosphorus.
Okay.
They did not meet the suspended solids, right? And in some instances, they're really close, like scenario 2. The 52% TSS reduction requirement of scenario 2, they had almost 50%. It's really, really close. It's, a very minor change in the site probably could have met that. So, but as James said, we're just kind of getting a sense of how did these sites compare, and would they have made it or not? And then, kind of next question to ourselves is what would have to be done to kind of make them work out. So, this was step 1 for redevelopment sites. We did the same analysis for a new development site. Again, those numbers are under each of the scenarios, so a bigger ask in TSS and typically a bigger ask in phosphorus. Interestingly enough, we found that we had better ability or current state for those developments. We're more often meeting the scenarios, so you got 7 yeses out of 15 potential boxes up there. So now we're in the 45% kind of range, and if you look at the yeses and the partials, we're closer to 85%. So again, all those developments for new development, they're in compliance with the current requirements. We wanted to kind of get a sense of how far off would they be. The other thing that we noticed is that for a lot of the new development in particular, we have a requirement to reduce peak flows, and so a lot of times those site developments are also enlarging facilities to deal with the peak flow management, which brings up the reduction in pollutants typically as you go. So.
And the other thing to note too, the 2 that have the most yeses are utilizing wet detention basins for their stormwater practice. So it's a practice that generally does do better at the removals because the water, it flows through them slower, has a lot more time to settle the particulates out.
Does that also help with the volume as well?
Yes, generally, for a new development, a detention basin is going to be what you're going to need to meet those peak flow control requirements, so the wet basin gets you the water quality, and because you're sizing the basin for the peak flow control, you end up with more water quality volume than you would if you were just sizing it to meet only the water quality requirements.
Right. Yeah, great question.
Since it sounds like most go with that option, is that also tend to be more of a cost-effective option then too? And we're saying it's fairly effective, right?
It is fairly effective. It's a scenario we're in right now where land is reasonably inexpensive.
Sure.
If this was, say, New York City, they wouldn't be looking to do wet detention basins because of the space that it takes up. It would be much more effective to spend more money on a more compact facility that may cost more to construct, but the value of the land that you're getting back far outweighs that cost. In this particular case, land is not as big of a number as the development is.
Got it, thank you. I would just second to that, where wet detention ponds are more typically used in new development. It's really hard to do redevelopment. And you look at larger cities like Green Bay or Appleton, and they're not really installing large ponds in the city because they don't have the space for it.
Right.
So it's not really a retroactive.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think the balance of new versus redevelopment versus the more crowded the city gets. Like realistically, what are we looking at long term?
Yeah.
That's
And wet detention works very well too for smaller sites, and it could apply to a redevelopment site, but all the infrastructure is in place there, so a lot of times it's more dispersed stormwater going to the different directions, and it's harder to kind of bring it all into a central point. So they'll be using biofilters and things like that, sand filters, other practices. So then the kind of the final question, I guess, if you will, is, so we know that the development sites we looked at were in compliance at the time they were built. We know that many of them might already be in compliance if this scenario was in effect at the time. But we also said, like, for those that were partials or for those that were not meeting it, could we change the practices on site to go to wet detention, or change the size of a filter that was on site, or do something else? Use upflow filters, different types of proprietary filters. And by and large, we found that the answer was yes. We generally could find an approach that would work to attain either sediment and or phosphorus reductions. They weren't always easy. Some of them certainly were going to cost some more. And so in the packet that you had, there was another sheet or two that talked about some of the costs for the different practices, the types of practices that were considered. For sake of time, I didn't want to go through all those again, but to know that, we did look at, was it feasible to meet these reductions, and what were some of the costs? Now, not all the facilities had a cost component analyzed to them. Only the two that were, the sites that were earlier part of our study here this year were ones that we did look at, not only what could the different practices be, but what were the costs associated with it. The three that were added on at the end, if you will, that aren't showing on this list anymore, were not looked at from a cost perspective. So just the two black, the Freddy's and Valley Vet, were essentially ones that we did some detailed cost assessments for. And I will say each site is really unique. So the practices that we chose to try to put in place may not work for another facility, even if it's very similar, because of the dispersed nature of stormwater, because of the space needs, because of the type of facility. If you're dealing with elder care, or you're dealing with children, you might not want to put a wet pond in place, right? So the selection of practices really is going to depend on the site as well. So some of the key takeaways that we had from doing the analyses, going back to the citywide plan in 22 and taking it through the study as it is today, site-specific conditions are definitely important for considering what practices would or could be used on a site. As we talked a little bit ago, peak flow reduction requirements, how they are sizing those facilities to mitigate those peak flows, often has a positive benefit and reduces sediment and phosphorus, pollutant loads, quite nicely as well. Infiltration, I think, even at low rates, can be very helpful for facilities. A lot of developers just choose not to consider that. They look at the checklist, like, I've got a soil type, it's not appropriate, blah, 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 they move on. We have looked at sites within the city. In fact, some of the airports are the most recent sites we looked at and found that with infiltration tests, you can show that the infiltration rates going on in those locations are much higher than the DNR would allow you to use as kind of standard practice in their guidance documents. And so if you have a facility that utilizes infiltration as well as another component, they can do quite a bit better if they did some testing to see what the infiltrative capabilities are. And cost is very, highly variable depending on the site, the practices chosen, et cetera. We did find some of our sites and some of the practices we considered would be more expensive. We actually found one or two that were equal, maybe even less expensive. Again, assuming that was a practice that was agreeable to that particular owner. And as we talked, James had pointed out before, you're not seeing 85% reduction for phosphorus. We feel that that's just too much for anybody to really be asked at this point in time. We do not want to have to constantly, turn to maximum extent practical. We want to put out values that we think are achievable, readily achievable by the development community and ourselves for that matter. And so we know that the higher we ask people to reach, the more of those maximum extent practicable requests that we'll get, and we have to be very discerning on, is that something that they brought forth a good case or not. So I know I went through a lot of material pretty quickly, and hopefully got a chance to digest some of the other material I've already received. And I don't want to, move on without having any of your questions answered. But we would be liking to get a recommendation from this board of what you feel would be an appropriate. And I'll throw slide 7 up there in a second with those different scenarios and metrics. But we would like you to consider and give us a recommendation for what you'd like us to move forward to. We have a Plan Commission tomorrow. And we already were in front of the Common Council with the workshop, so we are kind of developing our thoughts on that. We'll be looking then to revise the code language and then go to council with approval of those code updates in the very near future, completing this project by the end of '25, which is our grant deadline. So go ahead.
I have 3 questions.
Yes, ma'am.
So I apologize in advance.
Quite all right. It's good to have an expert in the room from our stormwater committee.
For some of the potential site impacts and then the alternative practices that were listed,
Yep.
one of them is the proprietary filter. Is that
Yes.
like an enhanced sand filter or something along that lines?
We look at an upflow filter actually
Okay.
as a particular device that can be modeled within the DNR's preferred model. I don't know, I shouldn't call it preferred model. One of the models that could be used.
Allowed.
Allowed, right. So that was a particular device that we looked at, what the efficiency of that particular device was.
And then maybe this is, I'm not sure how to word this question in particular. So like what percentage of the city's land is eligible for like new development versus redevelopment? Like do we have more of a surplus and likelihood of new developments being put in place to reach those higher goals? And what's the likelihood of redevelopment land happening?
Great question. I don't know if we have a clear answer.
Yeah, that would be a good one if we had Kim or Sarah here tonight. A good way to look at it is, anything that was developed really before, we put our first stormwater code in place in the early 90s. That was just peak flow control. Water quality didn't first appear in our code until, I believe, 2012. So anything developing after that, greenfield is new. If it was previously developed, it's going to be looked at as redeveloped. So if you look at what the city's boundary is right now, almost everything in that boundary is going to be considered redevelopment unless they had a previously approved plan. They have to, there's no backslide. You can't say, well, I was new development, now I'm redeveloping, so I get to meet lower standards. No, the standards you had at new development are still going to govern when you redevelop. But as the city grows, those are going to be the new developments areas that we're really looking at. So, but I don't, as far as numbers go, Alyssa, sorry.
We as part of the citywide study, though, we did look at rates of development for new development and redevelopment, so that some of those details are in the citywide plan, like what's happening over the last 5 or 10 years leading up to 2022. And then we use those projections going forward to kind of inform ourselves, like how much would come from the various potential sources.
While also looking at the comprehensive land use plan to see how those areas are going to develop.
Right. And of course, it's the caveat, like for your financial advisor, past performance is no guarantee of future. But that was the best we had to go by. Mm-hmm. Did you have a third question too?
Yeah, it actually leads us right into probably the next slide, which is the different options.
So the next slide is, I'm going to go back a step here. Actually, I could probably leave it here.
Whichever one. So the different scenarios for redevelopment versus new development, as we're discussing these, is it you pick scenario 1 for both categories, or is it you can pick scenario 1 for redevelopment, scenario 2 for new development?
It would be, so maybe I should go to slide 7 because it's a little clearer there. So the scenario, say scenario 3, for going across, would have both new development and redevelopment for TSS reduction requirements and new development, redevelopment, TP reduction requirements. So each scenario has its own comprehensive set of reductions for the two different types of development.
That being said, to answer your question, Alyssa, if as a board you wanted to say, well, we like the new development part of, say, 3, but we like the redevelopment of 4, that would be something that certainly the board could talk about and give us a recommendation. We tried to do as much mixing and matching as we could when we put the scenarios together to hopefully, but there's an almost infinite number of ways to put them together.
Right.
So it could be a la carte. Nice.
Sure.
I'll try not to make it complicated.
That's all right. Yeah.
Go ahead.
If I look through the scenarios and think about what I've heard, scenario 1, the numbers to some degree seem like they're high, and then when you match those against the analysis of the site development, there were some no's or some partials. Kind of similarly with 2, 90% reduction, and I know in some of those site developments you were expressing that there was significant reduction of TSS or TP in some of those. They were kind of overperforming, or they were doing really well.
Even with that,
but that's high.
Yeah, to your point, even with that, 90% is pretty aggressive.
That's high.
Correct.
So when I look back at the slides where you measured sites against scenarios, 3 and 5 seem to often have yeses or partials. The difference really between 3 and 5, as I see it or I'm understanding it, is just that Sawyer Creek is called out at the higher value because it is a larger watershed and a more impaired watershed, or more likely to be.
Yeah, the difference between 3 and 5 is the TMDL document identifies a specific TSS reduction requirement for the Sawyer Creek watershed that is greater than the rest of the city.
Okay.
So scenario 3 differentiates between development taking place within the Sawyer Creek watershed versus not in the Sawyer Creek watershed. Scenario 5 is the same across the entire city. So a developer wouldn't have to figure out which watershed they're in. The requirements are the same. Scenario 3 does specifically say, okay, Sawyer Creek, because the TMDL has a higher threshold for that watershed would be held to a higher standard than the rest of the city would be. That's really the difference between 3 and 5.
So what I'm hearing you say is that scenario 3 would be more difficult on developers to figure out where they were. I mean, obviously they're going to know, but it's not going to be consistent throughout the city, so that could lead to confusion.
Right, it could be a confusion point because it is not consistent. That being said, it's a pretty simple phone call or email to either planning staff or engineering staff by the designer to say, okay, where do we fall? That also being said, we have several maps out on the website that already delineate the watershed. So while it could be confusing, there's a lot of information that I believe is fairly readily available to help them make that determination before they start getting too far into their design.
And of course, we are the sustainability board, so we would want to be choosing something that's going to be the most sustainable. I'm just throwing that out there. Brad?
Could one argue that for scenario 3, the 40% TSS reduction for areas outside of the Sawyer Creek might be more advantageous to developers who are looking at redevelopment in the other areas within the city? Because they can meet a lower threshold.
Right.
Yep.
My understanding is the goal is achievable as possible with current technology without stifling development and that sort of thing. It's like, that's one of the, cost benefit analysis. I'm thinking, right? Is that what you're saying, Brad?
Commenting on developers may find it easier to develop in scenario 3 because they only have to meet the 40% reduction if they're not in the Sawyer Creek area.
Yeah, for redevelopment, yes, correct.
Right.
Yeah.
And so like would an 18% difference?
Wait until you get called. Alyssa. Please.
I would just suggest that we look at the total phosphorus before we look at the sediment, because the phosphorus is the one that we haven't had requirements for typically previously. That's a lot harder to reduce, and a lot of times, I'd say almost every time, with the reduction of the phosphorus, you get the sediment reduction. The sediment reduction is significantly less hard than the phosphorus, and the phosphorus is a huge problem and going to become a continuous problem and a requirement in permits to reducing.
Okay. And may I question sources of phosphorus, as long as we're talking about that, in addition to your laundry soap and that sort of thing, which a lot of people, use low phosphorus. Now, what are other sources of phosphorus, and how can that be mitigated other than just in the development site? Is that part of the consideration?
Agriculturally?
I have some information from the Minnesota Stormwater Manual that I was doing some research with, and they had a whole bunch of different phosphorus mitigation techniques, from like residential ones like reducing fertilizer and pesticide management, litter and animal control, yard waste management are all rated as high. Septic tank maintenance may not be as applicable, but native landscaping is one that's very high as well. As well as like municipal practices, so even like proper vehicle maintenance when they're washing, say, a vehicle, a lot of those can run off if it's not properly in one of these drain fields that is dealing with it. So I guess my question, going off you, Paul, is like, are those other mitigation techniques, do they contribute to like our meeting the requirement from the DNR? Like if we say improved a vehicle cleaning facility, right? It's not exactly, it doesn't seem like it's fitting within the requirements that we're discussing, but does it contribute to our overall like requirement performance?
Yeah, those can be really challenging to quantify, and so the DNR and the way the TMDL studies are built, they're built off of monitoring of various watersheds, and in fact the pollutant loadings that come in are all based on monitoring taking place over multiple years in different locations. So that's sort of maybe baked in there a little bit, but there's generally no because you have a vehicle wash program in place, there's no way to kind of quantify how that's going to make a citywide impact generally. Now, that said, there are some attempts to do that, like for leaf management, one in particular where DNR has looked at what amount of nutrients are coming off of leaf and leaf collection programs and how they can be of differing types, whether you're brooming them to the center, whether you get what type of equipment are you using, are you vacuuming them off versus pushing them around and what have you. So there are some credits available for programs like leaf management, but in general there's no cookie cutter or laundry list of different types of ways to reduce them that we could start to employ these 5 things and then feel we'd be getting a X% reduction. It's just not.
Well, I feel like it's still measurable though. If you're looking at the watershed, you measure before the town of Oshkosh and then right at the border as well. Like,
I think one important thing to note too is these numbers it's not that there is a sampling program or protocol that goes out and tests all the storm sewers to verify where you're at. It's all based off of computer modeling. Yes, the modeling is based off of a lot of testing that's been done, but showing compliance is not based off of sampling, it's based off of computer modeling.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, Vic, Alyssa, Jaden, in that order.
I am good. I pass.
Okay. Alyssa?
I would just add on your comment that the requirements are coming from DNR. So like they're not going to check box and give you a percentage. They want like physical practices that are doing the removal typically, especially when it comes to like phosphorus and sediment. There's other requirements in the MS4 permit, right? The Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System permit, okay? It's a mouthful. They're basically check boxes for the municipality that they have to do in addition to those physical practices they're putting in. So like they have to educate the public on mowing practices and leaf collection and fertilizer, and those are all things that they can do to check that box for their permit. But when it comes to the measurable change in like phosphorus removal or sediment removal, that's not a check box. That's an actual number from a practice you're putting in the ground. Would you agree?
Yes. I think that's an appropriate way to look at it.
Yeah.
And there's we're asked to kind of put in a guarantee, if you will, that the practice will be in place long-term. So by building a facility that you can own, operate, maintain, or through private ownership, have an agreement that they will own, operate, and maintain it appropriately, it's different than if you have a program where you're asking people to bring something somewhere or do something. It's a little more variable. So they are looking for kind of a guarantee, if you will. And so the types of practices that tend to apply to that are not, it's always as flexible as the things you were listing before, which are great practices, but I agree with what you said.
Jade?
Okay. So I know that this is a question that Alyssa asked in a way, and I'm hoping to maybe reframe it to just help maybe provide some mental weights to new development versus redevelopment based on, perhaps this is potentially a question for one of you two. Big picture wise, how much redevelopment versus new development happens? I'm not even looking for specific numbers. It could be 2-to-1, 3-to-1, could be 1-to-1, or, you know, big picture. I'd say within an order of magnitude is a good goal to help just contextualize the value of those numbers and provide some weights.
I don't know if we could easily get to that number.
Well, he's looking that up. I just want to say, I know that recently there was a car wash, Emma, do you remember that went through the Plan Commission? Did it have any special catch the water as it goes out rules? Do you remember?
Well, you mean the water that's being used to wash the vehicles?
Uh-huh,
That all goes to sanitary,
directly.
yes. Yeah, anything,
So that wouldn't have come up during a zoning.
right, yeah, anything that's a process like that, or even any floor drain inside of a building, that has to go to sanitary sewer, it can't go to storm sewer.
Does that include residential?
Yes, your floor drain in your house it needs to go to sanitary, not to storm.
Right.
Same way your sump pump needs to not go to sanitary, it needs to go to grade or to storm.
If I may,
Yes,
very
Bob.
quickly. And the point of my earlier question was, we have a balance between what's under the control of the developer versus outside influences of sources of phosphorus is really what I was getting at. And so that might also impact on how stringent we are on the developers as far as what we're picking for a target for phosphorus reduction. Because not everything is under their control. There's a lot that isn't. And a lot of times you struggle to answer the question and we don't know. Maybe that's one thing, we don't know what we don't know. So sometimes my opinion is to pick something, because we have no target now. So to be, steps in the right direction.
And I think a couple of the things, that, really need to be focused on is, one, fertilizers, as I recall, the state has a phosphorus ban on fertilizers. So you're not seeing a lot of that. Can you still get it? Certainly, you can, but it's a lot harder to get. It's more a matter of keeping, things like grass clippings, keep it in the yard instead of out in the street. If you are doing residential car washing, do it in the front yard or the backyard. Don't do it in the driveway where it runs right into the storm sewer system. And those are educational things more than they are something that can be measured.
So we need to have us a Kelly Ryer for sustainability.
We have us and Alyssa as a part of the Northeast Wisconsin Stormwater Consortium.
Yes.
And our city's membership, thank you, that's a good way to put it. So we do rely on NUSC to assist us with a lot of things as far as public information, education, and outreach. There are a lot of things that NUSC does as far as public engagement, going to events. I believe you've been at the farmer's market multiple times over the past several years, haven't you, Alyssa?
I've been, not many personally, but I've done other events in Oshkosh and the surrounding area. I think the previous person who held my position maybe have gone more.
Okay.
I don't want to deter it too much, but to go back to the education point of the general public, there is so much content for education and so many of the things that you can do as a resident tied to phosphorus and sediment. That like from fireworks to grass clippings to washing your car is things that are already existing documentation for people to read as a printed online copy or whatever they need. So there's the education out there, it's just getting it in the hands. That's the issue. And then if I can add, I would say that for when we're looking at the reductions, right? You have to, again, I would emphasize, look at what you can control. You can't control what a resident's doing on their land after they purchase the property, but you can control the reduction that happens to that property when it's being developed or redeveloped. And you can always change resident behavior over time, but you can't go and redevelop the property. So personally, I know we're still looking for some numbers or an estimate. I would say that we should focus on the total phosphorus first, and I would suggest that we go with a higher number. What I think is pertinent is that kind of estimated ratio of new development versus redevelopment, because if there's a significantly higher amount of new development we think that could happen, we might want to increase that percentage. But with that being said, I personally do not love scenario 3 as an option, just because I still think that there should be at least a 35% push for the redevelopment side of it too, because there is plenty of options for redevelopment in the area.
Yeah, I would also support that, Alyssa. I feel like two of the slides that were in the content for council that weren't included in this presentation were like the potential mitigation like techniques, and their like approximate TP percentage performance, and those were almost all above 30%. They were all in that range of the scenarios 1, 2, and 4 as well. So it seems like that's within feasible, capability of current technologies, which I acknowledge is an important aspect of this, as well as within cost too. And one of the two scenarios, it showed a lower cost for that higher TP performance solution. And I think that substantiates just as much as anything that we could go with those options. Also, if the other part that was included and wasn't in this presentation was the targets in the communities around us. And just looking at those, the averages were 55.2% for new development and 52.2% for redevelopment in those other communities, just averaging the column there, right? And I would say, almost none of those, our averages, at least in the redevelopment column, are significantly lower than those partner communities, which are part of the same watershed. And do we, as Oshkosh, really want to, kick the can down the watershed and not do our part in that performance, right? And do a lower target. I know that there's a lot of conversation around like trying to promote development in the city, and I support that as well, within limits, right, within the current technologies. But I don't think proposing scenario 3 or 5 that essentially they're almost already in compliance to, they don't even have to change anything. We are not really making a forward improvement in that performance. So that's why I'd be supportive of one of the more stringent scenarios, 1 or 2, maybe 4. It's hard to look at all the different percentages. But.
Yeah, I know you got a lot going on with those numbers, so I apologize for that. But also to get back to the development, kind of the potential anyway, looking again at the prior development leading up to the last citywide study, we were estimating about 80 acres per year of new development, so 80 acres of new development. We had just under 30, so 29, call it 30 acres for redevelopment, but there's also a mixed development, so it's like kind of, differing areas that some apply to one or the other, and that was another 14 acres, so maybe you'd have 45 acres that are on the lower end that might be more geared towards a redevelopment scenario, and about 80 acres potentially again.
Kind of a 2 to 1, 2 to 1 roughly.
Roughly a 2 to 1 new development to redevelopment. So we're growing because of the city limits keep expanding, that's kind of just allowing that new development kind of to drive, I guess, the numbers generally.
Much appreciated.
Yeah, and then to go back to the comment about the phosphorus, and I'm certainly it's that this body can decide what they feel would be an appropriate recommendation. Again, kind of the 30s to 35 is kind of where there's some practices that will start to fall away from the DNR's allowable use of those practices. Certain practices will not achieve more than 35% reduction. In fact, depending on the practice, you might get zero control for phosphorus depending on what the device is. So there might just be some practices that are more challenging, particularly for redevelopment, that could potentially be an issue for them. But I'm not telling you can't ask for a higher number.
Could I argue
Sure.
that for the redevelopment practices, it might be multiple smaller practices to meet that
Sure.
redevelopment goal, right? Like it might not be putting in a pond, right? That's not, if you think about an acre redevelopment in the city, like they're not gonna be putting a pond in, but there's smaller practices that they'd be able to utilize to meet that goal.
Yep.
Yeah, just to
Okay.
review too, I pulled up the SMP performance, potential SMP performance. A wet pond is greater than 50% TP. Biofilter is none, so that may be what you're referring to.
Correct.
Yeah, that could increase the phosphorus. Sand filter is 35, permeable pavement is 35, proprietary filter is 50, and then a catch basin is only 15. So that's only one, or I guess 4 out of the 6 options there have a performance of approximately 35% with current technologies.
Brad?
One thing to just note on that says potential SMP performance. I think one thing we want to, I am certainly in favor, or can certainly be in favor of a higher total phosphorus removal percentage. A question I had in a previous meeting was also like, what is the actual performance of these SMPs in removal of phosphorus or TSS? There's observed versus expected, right? I mean, we can say it's going to do one thing, but what does it actually do in practice, and who manages and measures that, and how do we know that it's actually doing what it's doing?
Yeah, and again, as I think James mentioned, that we're not out there monitoring everybody's development. It is based on computer modeling and the tools that everyone's being given, and the guidance documents from DNR and what have you, and best available technology. And typically, it's very challenging for a site to treat every single square foot of its development. So anything that goes off-site that is not treated has to be counted against that reduction percentage. So there's a little bit of that going on with many developments. It happens. It's very common that it's not all the entire lot could be treated potentially. So there, even though you have several practices that definitely get 35% higher, sometimes that there's some untrapped, untreated lands that bring that down on the whole for that property, if they're using certain practices.
Okay, so we have 8 of us that will be deciding this tonight for the Sustainability Board. We have 5 scenarios. So I'm thinking that definitely we're going to be able to narrow it down to, because there were 8 choices, right? However, I could see people wanting all of them. So I'm trying to figure out how we can vote on this and bring it down to one. If anybody wants to make a motion for a particular scenario, and see if you can get a second, and if we can have enough votes to accept that, we could do it that way. We could go around and you could all say your first choice, and then we could vote on it that way, or we could do the argue back and forth the discuss back and forth between the different scenarios. What's your pleasure? Jaden?
Also, potential option could vote to remove certain things from the pool, just to.
We could do that too.
Okay.
Alyssa?
I think I'd like a little bit more discussion. I think we can, I personally, I think there's at least 2 on there I'd be comfortable removing. So I don't know if that's something we can do, but then I would like a little bit more discussion into the benefits of higher, and the pros and cons to a higher reduction in phosphorus in sediment.
Okay, that's fair. So do you all think that we could eliminate 1 or 2 of these?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, does anybody want to eliminate number 1? Does anybody want to eliminate number 2?
I move we eliminate some.
You want to eliminate 2?
2 because, yes.
Okay. Anybody want to eliminate 3? 2, 3, 4. Anybody want to eliminate, what number was I on? 4. So did we just eliminate 3?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, but 4 of you eliminated 3. Got it. Okay. I wrote down 4 and I'm like, why'd I do that? Anybody want to eliminate 4? Can't vote more than once here, folks. We got 2 of them. Anybody want to eliminate 5? Okay. What'd we learn there?
You for sure eliminated 1, right? Or
Number 3.
Number 3, it sounds like it's out, yes. Want to go another round, or Brad?
Well, I was just going to suggest, it sounds like we're particularly focused on total phosphorus reduction requirements. Excuse me, is there one set within the scenarios that folks are more aligned with? Because it sounds like we can consequently make a recommendation of TSS reduction from scenario 2 and TP reduction from scenario 4 or something like that. So is there a TP reduction pair for new and redevelopment that folks like or feel more strongly about?
We're talking just these numbers, right?
Yes.
What you got?
Alyssa.
I personally am more comfortable with the scenario 1 and 2 for the phosphorus. I think the minimum should be 35. But I don't like how number 4 is a 50-50 split when new development has more ability to put in larger practices for removal.
Say which one is a 50-50?
Scenario 4 it's 50, it's
same amount.
40.5 and
Right.
40.5
Oh, sure.
reductions for both.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's fair, especially if there's the chance for more newer development.
So you would argue 1 or 2?
Right now.
For TP only.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm mostly looking at the TP because the sediment reduction will come with it.
Those two scenarios were derived from a study that was done on the watershed. Is that what I picked up on?
Scenarios 1 and 2, I think, came out of
They
the,
were from the prior citywide study. So, scenario 1 for phosphorus reduction under redevelopment was basically guided by the DNR performance for wet detention, so that 57%. And then the 39% were kind of guided by wet pond use. So they're higher numbers, but they're also assuming from the prior study that they're going to be able to put on wet detention, and that's going to get you a higher amount of phosphorus reduction. So there was kind of a focus at the time about using wet ponds for new development and redevelopment for scenario 1. Scenario 2, I guess looks like also was kind of predicated on wet detention possibilities for that as well. So scenarios 1 and 2 are higher because they were leaning more heavily on the use of wet detention in the analysis that was done in the prior study.
I just have some comments to make.
Go for it.
About the benefits, in my opinion, the benefits of a higher reduction in phosphorus. So while the phosphorus loading comes through all parts of the water and from our neighboring communities who aren't included in our code the code development here, the higher the decrease in phosphorus ultimately is going to lead to a higher quality of water we have, which is a huge resource and is a huge pull for new development, and therefore could be increased tax revenue with new developments coming in. So I think that there could be some, depending on how the code for phosphorus reduction compares to other communities, it could be a slight deterrent for new development, but I feel like if we're enhancing the quality of our water and the resources in our community, it's going to both benefit the sustainability of the community and also the future development of it.
Also in the vein of sustainability of balancing people, planet, and profit, I think that cost consideration, and the sustainment of our community and development is an important part of it. But I also worry about if we were to choose a lower target, we still have to meet these standards. Like eventually, I know that there's not a date, but that cost is borne onto the residents or the taxpayers essentially in the future rather than the developers now. I think we've talked about how it's easier to treat on-site rather than bring stormwater into then a central, high-tech, filtration system in the future that isn't even cost feasible now, probably going to be more expensive in the future, right? And so if we don't have the developers consider this now, it's going to make our problem more costly and actually put the cost onto the people that maybe even aren't even don't even have control over these new developments that have implemented say something that isn't as costly or isn't as good at filtering as they could have, right? And so that's why I'm leaning more towards the higher TP requirements. I would make a motion to recommend scenario 2 and maybe some discussion if somebody seconds it.
Seconded.
Okay.
So the scenario 2 seems, not saying extreme, but since it's higher up and there is the potential for issues with development, does scenario 1 still fill the gap that we're talking about with higher rates, but it's not as high on the TSS side? I just also want to make sure we do strike that balance between both sides and not go out with like the highest for each one.
I agree. I would also go for scenario 1 over 2.
Paul?
I think we might be coming to a consensus. I agree with Dick.
You agree with
What
1?
we just said about scenario 1.
Okay, Jaden?
I think based on, again, historic performance doesn't necessarily dictate future performance, but if we think about the impact of the percentage differences, new development, at least historically, has been about twice as high. If we think about that, it's sort of a, in that vein, I really think scenario 2 has the greater opportunity for benefit. So I stand by scenario 2. I think scenario 1 wouldn't be a bad option by any means. But net benefit, I think scenario 2 is greater.
Alyssa?
I would agree to some extent. I think that there could be a compromise between 1 and 2, where the benefit to number 2 scenario for the phosphorus removal is it's a lower redevelopment number, and we've historically seen more redevelopment than, or new development than redevelopment, so that fits that guideline. And then I'm a little thrown off with the suspended solids removal number, where I personally, and this is probably me being a little bit of a him-har, think that like the 85, 58.4 for suspended solids and then a 61% and 35% seems like the happy medium between those two. And if you have that higher level of phosphorus reduction, and those do tend to remove sediments at the same time, you might be getting that higher benefit without putting that higher number associated with it.
Brad?
I would also, I would echo a lot of what Alyssa said. I like the combination of TSS from scenario 1, TP from scenario 2. Notice also that for redevelopment in scenario 1, it's the same amount as it is in 3 and 5, and so we know that already those were meeting requirements. 85 is only slightly more than the 80. I was just looking back through, like, if TP was the thing we're most focused on. Scenario 2, when we looked at like alternative site designs for some of the sites that had been previously developed, like TP was met as a yes for scenario 2.
Chuck, can you pull that slide up?
Go back to that slide.
Okay, so
Modify my motion.
We'll get there.
Is this the slide you were just looking at, Brad?
No, I don't think you've included it for us, but it's the alternative designs for the Freddy's site.
Oh.
Oh,
Where it
okay.
lists out all scenarios just for that particular site.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. back to
Okay,
the
so
line.
now I think what we're discussing is looking at scenario 1 for TSS and scenario 2 for TP. Did I get that right?
That's what I'm hearing.
Okay. And did I hear somebody say they'd like to alter a motion? we can.
To
we
what you're
can
talking about, yes.
Okay, because if we're done with the discussion on that one, we can just vote on it, vote it down, and then we can do it again. If,
Or you could just withdraw it if you,
Or
if
you
you
can
could get
withdraw.
both.
I'll withdraw, yeah.
and is your second okay with that?
Yes.
Okay, so let's try this again. Okay, what's the motion?
I don't know if I have a motion quite yet.
You're not sure what you like yet?
No, I know what I like, but I'm still just running through a couple of the factors in my head.
Brad?
I'd like to make a motion for us to recommend TSS reduction requirements from scenario 1 and TP reduction requirements from scenario 2.
I'll
Second.
that. Double second.
You still have my
Okay.
suggestion, Brad.
Do we need to have further discussion on this? Okay.
No, I'm just overthinking things because we've talked about the pros and the cons of the percentages, but not some of the practices necessarily. But I also know that it's 740, and I could talk about this for a lot of reasons.
Oh, 740, I was thinking percentages, where's that on there? I get it.
I guess I would have I'll remove that thought and just go back to, so you met with Common Council and did they have a recommendation or you just presented the information?
We primarily just presented the information. Certainly, I think there were some leanings, but unfortunately, we had a very small sample size of council that night. I believe, was it just 3, I believe, so we did not even have a quorum of council at the workshop that evening. You don't need a quorum for a workshop, but we did only have 3 council members present for that workshop.
Council is looking for direction from SAB and Plan Commission.
So basically, we'll make a recommendation tonight. Plan Commission will make a recommendation tomorrow, and those recommendations will go to the council next Tuesday, correct?
No, they will not be on the next council agenda.
But
for
a future
Okay.
council
A
agenda.
A future council agenda, yes.
Okay. Chuck, did you have
I
something?
was just going to add that the 61% in phosphorus reduction for new development was looked at in comparison to the 90% TSS reduction. So like, the percent of phosphorus that comes through using, again, wet detention as a surrogate practice, that 61% is achievable, but when you have a much higher TSS reduction. So choosing a lower TSS reduction, that phosphorus will drive, as I think was discussed, maybe a larger amount of sediment, which I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it does get to be onerous and challenging for even new developments to achieve a 61% percent reduction. They're basically saying you got to build a facility that gets a 90% equivalent TSS reduction, for example, which is quite a bit higher than what we're being asked to do today. Even with facilities, some of the facilities that we looked at that had flood reduction, you're close to 85, but the 90 is a step up from that even. So I guess I would just say that asking, not saying again right or wrong or otherwise, but asking a 61% reduction for new development for phosphorus is likely to land maximum extent practicable requests on the engineering department's desk. In which case then there's got to be an adjudication of like, is it reasonable for them to come in with a lower number and why? And so there'll just be more work through the development process for staff that will have to discern whether that was an appropriate ask for the site or not.
What I heard from that was it's best not to mix and match, that these are lined up the way they are for a reason.
There is some of that, yes. Not in all cases, but in some cases, yes. So, yes, to some degree.
Okay,
Right.
thanks. I think you were first, Vic.
I guess my question would be then, is the 57.4%, like, is that a significant difference? Like, is going with 57.4 going to eliminate any of the concerns that 61% brings, or is that a marginal difference? Like, are we splitting hairs here? Are they going to notice a 3.6% difference in requirement for TP reduction for new development? That would be my ask. Because if we can push for higher, I would argue to push for higher, again, if it's 3.6% difference.
It depends on development.
Yeah.
I mean, really it does. And the practice, the higher the reductions that we make it, the more practices that get removed from their toolbox of potential practices they can put in place is the challenge. Most new developments will go with wet detention. The higher you go on the redevelopment side too, like 39.4%, that's just kind of out of reach for a lot of the practices that are currently available. And the reason we took 30 instead of say 35 is to account for some of that, the use of the lower practices that are getting reduction credit for phosphorus, but understanding that they may not all be 100% coverage on the properties, which is why we grabbed a slightly lower number for those 30s, if you will.
Let's talk about number 5. Nobody talked about number 5.
It's pretty lame.
What's lame about it?
If you're gonna go with 5, you might as well go with 3 to help protect Sawyer Creek, in my personal opinion. Noticing it's a more vulnerable watershed, why wouldn't you take the extra step to acknowledge it? Question.
Jaden?
Isn't 3 just less stringent than 5? So kind of the opposite of what you're saying.
Yeah, it depends how you look on it. I mean, ideally, other areas would be the 58.4 and Sawyer Creek would be higher than that, but I did appreciate that at least called out Sawyer Creek.
I think it's a hard decision for us to make because we don't want to be negative on the development, and none of us are developers, so we can't necessarily say like, what is this worth it? Like, are people going to come to Oshkosh and want to build here, see the 61% say no, or are they going to come here, use their technology and stay? So I mean, I think,
And we have areas of expertise on this board that we don't have on the Plan Commission. But there are developers on the Plan Commission who will be making recommendations based on that, which is why when we started, I said, let's remember we are the Sustainability Board, and I'm not arguing with what, I just wondered why nobody had mentioned 5, and I have a reason now. But I think that it's important that we do remember that we're trying to protect the city as best we can, and our water, and our air, and our, everything.
And then
Just
it's
everything.
And then it's a recommendation. Like, what we decide here doesn't necessarily become practice. It's our recommendation.
Correct.
It is up
Yes.
to council to make a decision. So we should do what's best for our board.
Yes.
I can't help but
Thoughts?
think of like another potential compromise where we're voting like on each column rather than each row. Because like the first row, it seems like 85% seems like a good number because it's middle of the road, but it represents an improvement, but isn't as crazy as 90. Redevelopment, we want to have one of these numbers that is more than 40. They're all above 40 essentially, but I would be open to almost any of them except for maybe the 72 because that seems extreme. The third one, there's discussion around 61 being too much, 57 being marginally easier, even 54 being a little bit more in striking range, right? That's kind of the middle ground number. And then on the fourth column, 39 was too much, 30 was too low, 40 is too high as well then, so 35 is a nice, mama bear situation.
Yeah, I have the same thought, yeah.
So I'm happy to vote on this current motion and support it, but we could maybe cater ourselves in a way that would be more approachable to both council and to the Plan Commission, I think, by kind of mismatching.
Brad?
What were the numbers you said for, for
TSS, we were going with 1, and with TP, we're going with 2.
Or what he just said.
85 and then 58.4.
And then 54 and 35, if I quoted you correctly.
54 and 35. So we have,
So I had 85 and 54, then I had 61 and 35 down.
We're talking about
What he just said?
correct, which is different than what you have written down.
Okay, so
So-
we would be changing the motion as well.
I would like to withdraw my motion.
Okay, so we withdrew that motion. Let's try another one.
You
Who
need
wants to go?
you need a second to concur with that.
Oh, yes.
I don't know who got the credit for it. Okay, I can.
Yeah. Before we discuss this any further, I want to specifically ask Chuck and James, do you want us to do one scenario, or are you truly okay with us going a la carte here?
I would like to see how the conversation goes and talk to you. Because honestly, it might be, okay, that can work, or maybe we shouldn't go that way. So if you could indulge just a little, so I could hear a little bit more of where you're looking at being.
If we come up with a combo that really doesn't make sense, you will speak up and tell us,
Yes.
right? I'm asking you please to do that.
Yes.
Kind of did already.
They were nodding their heads, sort of.
Yes.
Okay, Alyssa.
This is gonna come off as sassy, and I swear it's not sassy. If 61% isn't realistic, why is it an available scenario percentage?
It's realistic if you're required 90% sediment reduction, TSS. So
Okay.
So it's only good for number 2.
Well, so if you have, sorry,
Talk it through.
it's 8
Sure.
p.m. 61% would result in 90%.
working backwards from some DNR rules of thumb, yes.
So, but having a lower sediment requirement wouldn't, you might get, let's say you have the 61% phosphorus removal, in theory you would get up to 90% sediment removal. So having a lower sediment removal requirement, in theory, isn't a downside necessarily, correct?
To have a lower sediment removal is not necessarily a downside, other than, yes, your phosphorus would probably require it to get higher.
Okay, let's see what Jaden has to say.
So just to clarify this and hopefully help reframe it so that I'm understanding this correctly, there's no situation, no practicable situation in which we could have, say, 61% phosphorus reduction because everyone in the room, and I'm just saying this for humor me, everyone in the room says, phosphorus has an outsized impact. We need to prioritize that above sediment. So say we had 80-40, again, humor me, and 61-35. There's no way in which that would work, is in essence what you're saying.
I wouldn't say that, only because there are some technologies that are out there, some filtration practices, some chemical additives that would settle out, that become more, again, like that wastewater plant process, which aren't super practical for most to be asked to implement. There are emerging DNR guidance documents that might allow for higher reductions in phosphorus. Those guidance are not completely completed yet.
And just to provide a little bit of why, an additional thought process there, when we're thinking about what we want to move the needle on and hitting those targets, we have basically a 20% shift in terms of our sediment versus a 86% shift in our phosphorus. So that was kind of the reasoning behind the question, is how can we prioritize the thing with the much bigger, shift that we intend.
Vic?
I guess going kind of off of what you were saying, so to kind of clarify what I've been hearing throughout the whole conversation is enforcing a 61% reduction limits the options that people would have. So therefore you're going to create a city potentially that has all one type or a very narrow lens on how we're reducing that, right? You're not allowing a diversity of options for these developers, right? We're kind of pigeonholing them, if you will, into something that will get them to 61%. Is that fair to say? That's kind of what I'm hearing, is that...
Essentially, they're very likely to use the same practice anyway, but now they're upsizing the practice and taking more of their land. Again, because we saw in some examples, wet detention is a very common practice for new developments. You've got the best opportunity to utilize that practice. We're just going to make them significant. I should say they're going to be larger to get to that.
So just beefing up the size of what already exists.
Of what would exist? Yes.
Yes.
So then that leads to the question of the land use. Are we being efficient
Mindful.
with our land use by potentially going bigger? Do others feel the same?
That's
on
where I
that?
was getting.
Okay.
Sustainability is hard.
Right.
There's
it's
just
a
so
cost
many
benefit.
variables.
Yeah. My brain hurts.
Another data point to make your brain hurt more. The Appleton TP requirements for both new development and redevelopment, they range from 40.5 all the way up to that 85.6. That's going to be required. In Lake Winnebago, it is 85.6% in Appleton for both new development and redevelopment.
When you say range, what do you mean?
Yeah.
So for the Fox River watershed, it's only 40.5% for both new development and redevelopment TP percentage reduction. So the Fox River requirements in Appleton are less. Lake Winnebago is maximum required. Let's see, Bear Creek is also at the maximum. Garner's Creek is somewhere in between at 68.6% and again, it's the same between new development and redevelopment. Mud Creek is 48.2 for both, and then the Appleton and Duck Creeks is 40.5 and 40.5. And
That's
in,
TP reduction?
correct, in Appleton. So they have a range.
And the biggest reason for that is most of Appleton falls in the lower Fox. Only the part that would drain directly to Lake Winnebago would fall in the upper Fox. And that's how I believe that's, Chuck, maybe you can correct me, but that's how that TMDL broke down some of those smaller watersheds into different requirements. Kind of like we have a different TSS requirement in Sawyer Creek. I think that lower Fox TMDL had a lot of different requirements depending on which one of the reach sheds, as the TMDL calls it, you were in.
Yeah.
And that city chose to just adopt the TMDL reduction requirements and just deal with it through the maximum extent practicable mechanism that the developers have and the city has. But that also means they're constantly having to deal with people raising their hand because they can't necessarily meet the reduction, and then the city has to decide whether it's an appropriate ask or not. So it just complicates staff involvement in developments.
Jaden?
So, recognizing ultimately, as Marty has said before, that our goal is sustainability, not necessarily the additional elements here. I do want to ask, is there a particular threshold at which the feasibility and viability or cost effectiveness begins to be an impediment? I'll leave my question at that.
So 30 to 35% is kind of the break point for most practices that are smaller for redevelopment sorts of sites. So think you get in that 35%, you're treating the entire site with one of a few practices that DNR would give a maximum credit for 35%. You're assuming you're treating the entire site. Or you have to use a different practice that you can't use the biofilters because those will get you nothing, but you can use a sand filter. You can use porous pavement, you can use a different technology. If you have the space, you can put a wet pond in there and that will do just fine. Again, from the new development standpoint, just the higher the number, the bigger the facility has to be, whether it's filtration and you're having more filters, or if it's a wet pond, just to be that much larger, it becomes an economics and space constraint.
Melissa?
On the topic of it being a sustainable decision to some degree, I think there's the environmental sustainable and then the economic sustainability as well. Where we're going to have, as a municipality with an MS4 permit, the requirement to have so much reductions in phosphorus within the community. And is it worth putting the potential conversations with the engineering department for approval of plans for that higher 61% for less potential municipal work in its own individual projects for phosphorus removal in the future? Does that make sense? Because I'll leave it at that and see if anybody else has anything to add to that. Does that make sense, Emma?
I think so, yeah.
Right, so if you're putting more of the onus on the developer, that's reducing the potential future work for projects the municipality will have to put in theory.
Sure.
You could say no.
No.
Well, and that certainly, yes, the more that is done through development is a lower burden that has to be done citywide by the stormwater utility, but it also adds if it goes too far, it adds a significant plan review burden on staff to the point where, we're consulting it out again instead of, staff doing it. So there is kind of a difficult point there.
And I guess the only thing I would say is that it could shy developers away from the city, potentially. If it was deemed by them onerous enough, they felt they would have to oversize their facilities and not have to do that someplace else.
Which could
Right.
hurt the economic leg of
Exactly.
the sustainability.
But increase the quality of the water, which could increase the, it's complicated,
Yeah,
especially.
it's not an
in the
easy,
city.
I don't
Yeah.
envy you at all. It's not an easy task we have before us.
I think what I'm stuck on right now is I just really don't like the 39.4% for the redevelopment requirement. That doesn't feel realistic in comparison to the amount of redevelopment that could be happening, and that's why I'm stuck on not just choosing number one.
You want it to be higher or lower?
I think redevelopment can be like 35%. I personally think that that's fine. And I know I'm changing your numbers, and I'm not trying to be complicated, but like if 61% isn't reasonable, and it's like that's just like not likely to actually be a feasible thing, and it could put more work on staff, right? Even though it could reduce more of the phosphorus long run, I feel like 57.4 is a reasonable decrease, right? We're talking about what, like 4% roughly decrease. I just don't love that redevelopment is a higher percentage. I mean, it makes sense because you have to balance that out. I just feel like more of the onus should be on the new development than redevelopment, especially if, I don't know, I look around and I see so much new development happening within the city,
So would you feel that scenario 1 with the very last box changed to 35 would appease you? Tonight.
Whoa. It's not on me. It's on a group
but
conversation.
I think it's pretty clear that you're more of the expert in this room. No offense to anyone else. So I want your opinion to be heard.
I would say Chuck and James are the
They're not on the board.
the biggest expert.
not on the
I guess
board.
I think this goes back to a question that I think you answered before. So you said realistically for redevelopment, 30 to 35% phosphorus removal is like achievable. And that's where I'm kind of stuck. If we're agreeing that 61% for new development for phosphorus removal isn't really like, it could happen, it creates more work on the planning department. And let's say 57.4% is more of a realistic number for new development. I feel like we're having this issue of 61's too high for new development, 39's too high for new development. And like, I would love to just ruin your numbers, But if that doesn't work, I guess I'd love to get an opinion as to like, if those aren't like necessarily realistic numbers, like what is the theory behind putting these in, and then I know you're not going to vote, but I think I need some more understanding as to the percentages.
And Chuck, correct me if I'm wrong, I think where some of those numbers came from is looking at, the DNR standards of, if you're getting, look at scenario 1, if you're getting on the redevelopment side, about a 58% reduction in TSS, you're getting about a 40% reduction in phosphorus. If you're at, scenario 2, which is, we'll say about 50%, TSS reduction, you're at about 35%. As I recall our discussions, Chuck, that was kind of how those splits came about.
Yeah, some of them were definitely that, and some again were like just DNR practice limits. So the 35 is kind of the practice limit for a lot of the DNR standards. And then the reason why we didn't recommend 35 for, say, scenarios 3 and 5 was recognizing that some redevelopment sites aren't going to capture the entire site, so we toned it back a little bit and said maybe 30 is a good number because you're not going to capture every square foot of that site, and you can still use quite a host of tools to get to that 30+%, which is kind of how those scenarios 3 and 5 kind of shook out for the redevelopments percentages for phosphorus. And the 54%, that's kind of the number that tags along with 80% for new development, which is why the 54% is where it's set for new development phosphorus with the 80% new development. And then, wanting to recognize Sawyer Creek was a watershed that needs assistance, And if you ask that either citywide or at least for Sawyer Creek, you're gonna help the rest of the city along. So 58.4 kind of became a number we latched onto in a couple of different scenarios because of the Sawyer Creek specific target.
There's this table that might help us. It's the site revisions slide, and it shows your analysis of the most recent redevelopments and new developments, and it shows, is it feasible to meet these scenarios? And that's really what we're talking about, right?
Is that
I think it's the next one, isn't it?
this new development one? Was it, or
No, that's
it's the
saying
next
do the
one.
existing site designs,
Oh.
this one here.
this guy?
Yep.
Okay. This assumes we could potentially change the practices on site, yes.
Hmm.
So it depends on the site.
But 3 and 5 are the only ones that get all yeses.
Correct.
For current projects.
This looked at the 5 sites that are named there, the 3 redevelopment, the 2 new development sites. It looked at what were their practices that could be put in place that would meet those scenarios, and we looked at a couple of different types of potential practices.
Yeah, this is not looking at what are the practices in place. That was the previous slide. This is taking these scenarios and making some changes to the design of the site. Could it reasonably meet the scenario?
Right.
So if we went with scenario 1, but the TP requirement for, even then, scenario 1, it shows that 39.4 TP requirement for the redevelopment site is
What's that?
feasible. It's actually it looks like the new development site of 57.4 TP percent that the Valley Veterinary Hospital would have struggle meeting it, but it does meet 54%. So it's like very close there. So that would be if we went just with scenario 1 as it is. Not that I'm making a motion, but it would it would mean that the plan department would get 1 request, right, out of these 5 sites to employ the maximum extent possible requirement. And I feel like that's a good balance where maybe some of them we know won't be able to meet the requirements, but that's kind of feels like a sweet spot in the requirements to say we want to push the envelope, but not too much where it's overly onerous on the plan department to approve all of these and take a look at them. But, I'd still be open to mismatching or changing it to 35% at the end. It's just as an example though. Right. There's a lot of yeses here, is what I'm trying to say.
I'm proposing that we try and stick to a single line to make things less complicated, since there's like associations with the sediment and correlation to the phosphorus. I think I'm sorry for raising my hand, but I'm leaning towards scenario 1 just as a whole currently, for simplicity's sake. And I would argue that the potential short-term pain of some projects having to go through the planning department is worth the future gain in phosphorus reductions for the city.
I would agree, and I'd like to make the motion to request scenario 1 as written.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there discussion on this, Alyssa, perchance?
Can I ask somebody a question?
Absolutely.
Brad, you have some knowledge in this as well,
Yeah.
and I would love to hear your opinion on this.
I've appreciated a lot of this discussion, excuse me, as I went back through and looked at some of this. I was leaning at some of the lower numbers and trying to put a little bit more of my economic development hat on. But as I look at some of the TP and TSS load reductions, looking at like existing sites with alternative site design, it seems like the numbers are up there. So, and clearly that is possible. I know that phosphorus removal is expensive, right? Or it can be expensive, and so that's maybe the one piece. I mean, I think you and I both know, right? Or like we've got that kind of shared thing. But if this body is comfortable with recommending scenario 1, I mean, that doesn't make it the law of the land. That's just our recommendation. So I'm comfortable with that.
Further discussion, anyone? Okay, so we're going to vote on this. We'll do I think we better do a
call.
written vote. What we're voting on is number 1 across the board.
Great. Margie Davy,
Yes.
Lisa Moore,
Yes.
Jacob Claymeyer,
Yes.
Alyssa Renke,
Yes.
Vic Oliver,
Yes.
Jaden Zern,
Yes.
Paul Trader,
I'll make it unanimous.
and Brad Spanbauer.
Aye.
All right. 8-0.
It passed? Wow. Wasn't that an awesome discussion? And we're all so much more knowledgeable. We have to recognize on the Sustainability Board, we do have water experts, we do have engineers, we had a lot of things to contribute to this. So, and tomorrow night, the Plan Commission will have different things to contribute, so it'll be interesting to see how they stack up. Okay.
Just one last thing. Informally, I'm fine with how we voted, but if there is pushback based off of like one of the percentages, I would be comfortable with slightly reducing it as long as it's above like the 45% or whatever.
As long as it's not bare minimum.
Yeah, I don't want bare minimum. I think it's important that while it can create work for the municipality and the staff, I think it's also really telling to be kind of the community that puts that big step forward for things like phosphorus removal in a separate TMDL. Like, it's hard to compare ourselves to Appleton or Green Bay when they're in a different, totally different. It's not like their MS4 is the same as their requirements are, well, MS4 is complicated, but the TMDL, right, the water stuff. So I think it's complicated and there's a lot of factors, but based off of like my knowledge and understanding, I think that's okay. Okay, sorry.
Good stuff.
All right.
Appreciate the great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Yeah.
You're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting if you'd like.
No, they want to go home.
Appreciate the offer.
I talked to James and he was so excited to come tonight.
Oh, I
was like,
know.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Have a good night.
Thank
so much for
you.
your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, James, for all you do.
Thank you for letting us put you through the ringer.
Hey, that's all right. It's okay.
There's a coffee mug in there, so you might need that for tomorrow.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks.
James.
Coming back to our agenda, we have the Summer Farmers Market for discussion. I believe we have some dates on that are confirmed.
We do have some dates, and I apologize. I would have sent these out sooner, but just forgot. But the dates that we have confirmed are June 21st, August 9th, and then a third date of October 11th.
Okay, so then we need to figure out who's going to, the only one I'm worried about is June 21st. We need to figure out who can staff that and if we want it to have a theme or not. Is that an offer there?
I would
Okay.
happily staff that.
Jaden says he can be there.
How many people do you want?
I think, what did you said, 2 we can do, but 4 would be nice because then you could do it in shifts.
Right. The farmer's market requires setup about, well, they ask for it at 7 o'clock, but 7:30 is.
Acceptable.
Yeah, usually. And then it runs until 12:30, so it's easier if you have to have at least 2 people or you don't get to go to the bathroom that whole time, you know? But it's easier if you have 4 because then you can trade off, so.
I can go on June as well. June.
June 21st?
21st,
You're
yep.
good with, Jake? Okay.
You can do June 21st.
Who said that?
Paul, you're good?
Paul?
I could do June 21st.
Okay.
I don't have my calendar.
It's okay.
Like,
Well, and we can get in touch with Emma too, or you can
Yeah.
or you can contact me. We will need somebody to pick up the tent and the materials from Emma's office at some point, like the Friday before would be really good. So you can talk among yourselves and see how that works, or let Emma know. I don't really think that if they talk among themselves about setting up for the farmer's market, that's going to be considered a walking quorum, because we're going to have 3 people there. Are you noticing? I mean, there's going to be,
We notice.
you notice it
yeah.
while they're there.
Yep.
Okay.
I can reach out ahead of time. I think usually we get some more information of like where the booth's going to be located and stuff as well.
Yes.
So I'll just send an email, and then if someone can let me know, they'll come grab everything that you need.
Okay. Y'all got that? Do you want to look at August 9th and October 11th now, or do you want to save that for a future meeting?
I know I can do August 9th, but not the October 11th.
Okay.
I have current availability for August 9th.
Well, put it on your calendar then.
It's on my calendar, but just like with work, if a community requests me to go
I
to an
know.
event, I have
I'm
to
teasing you,
prioritize that.
Liz. It's okay. Okay. And we can flesh these in later when everybody has their calendars too. Any discussion about themes, or we just go with?
I think at the next meeting, when we're talking about composting, potential like surveying or asking people to provide feedback about composting if they're interested.
So at our July meeting, you think we could talk about it for the August meeting, is what
Yeah.
you're saying? Okay.
In that vein, we might want to decide on a theme for the June.
Given that it's in like 2 weeks.
It's summer solstice. It's the 21st.
I can
Yeah.
bring my solar ovens,
There you go.
You have a solar oven?
a couple of them.
Well, you
You guys can
definitely
wear
should.
those.
Those are the sort of things that draw people in, and we did have a solar,
World peas.
yes, yeah,
We
we had
sure
world peace. We had something that looked really cool when the sun hit it, when it started spinning, you know. One of our members had that at that point. Okay. Any further discussion on the farmer's market, or are we good? Okay, moving on. Sustainability-related plans. Discussion. Emma.
So the update I have on the sustainability plan, we had some public engagement sessions last week. Unfortunately, had low turnout, but everybody was very engaged and stayed, I would say, for the majority of the time of each session. I think we had 10 people total show up. But there was sticky notes on every board and just lots of good discussion, which was great to see. We did have some conversations about maybe doing some follow-up on the Sustainable Oshkosh webpage, maybe just keeping it out there for a short period of time if those individuals wanted to include some more information, or if other public, residents wanted to provide feedback. We still are doing the bi-weekly check-ins with that consultant as well. And then they did share at those public engagement sessions just kind of the rest of the schedule, and we're really hoping to have the draft done mid to late July, and then all the necessary parties will review, provide comments, and the plan will be completed hopefully late summer. This is if all goes smoothly. That's just kind of the tentative timeline for now. The comprehensive energy plan, they're still working on data collection. I think they're doing collection right now for solar feasibility on municipal buildings. And then that consultant is actually going to be on site on Friday to meet with just like the necessary department heads and kind of give them an update at where he's at. And then again, another opportunity for them to give him feedback because he has not been on site yet. So they're both moving along.
Was there, we talked a little bit about in the composting of bulk waste, like the need for community surveying. Is that still a part of the sustainability plan?
So that is part of the discussion of maybe putting something on the website. If we have the time, I can see if we can maybe have some questions added.
It wouldn't be through Polco like most other city surveys?
I don't think so, just because now, if it's related to that plan, I mean, we're kind of short on time here where it would have to just be more of like a questionnaire kind of a thing. I mean, we can still put it out on all of our social media and work with Oshkosh Media perhaps on getting that out. Like I said, we're just kind of short on time with that timeline of wanting that plan done by the end of summer.
I will say that it was very interesting. They had about 12 boards that were set up. I'm sorry more of you weren't able to make it, to actually weigh in on the different plans. They had 3 sessions during the day, and I stayed for all of them. Channel 26 was there. They were interested and sent a reporter. They were also broadcasting it on the radio, the fact that it was happening, because we had people coming in and I'd say, "So, how'd you know about this?" And they either said, "Well, I got an email from somebody that I know," or they said, "I just heard it on the radio." I thought it was important that we get some clue of how they were finding out about this so that we could, I don't want to say exploit, but so we could take advantage of that in the future to use that more too. What they did was they had a set of guidelines for what the sustainability plan would follow for everything, and then put up boards that said, for government, for water, for air, that's a little simplistic, but, and had some scenarios down. It turned out to be all they had a list of our accomplishments, and the last 2 years were covered very thoroughly, which is good, but that's the feedback they got from the staff when they started talking to staff about sustainability finally. So, like I said, it was very interesting. I wish more people would have participated, but we did get a lot of good feedback in that the people who came wrote a lot of notes, which was wonderful. So there's that. That's all I wanted to say about that. I'm done. Agenda items for future meeting. We have composting and bulk waste. I'm guessing we'd like to keep that on there. The summer's farmers market we'll bring back each time until we're done. And the seasonal sustainability spotlight.
Yeah, apologies. I brought it up and I remember Emma told me that I need to submit things at least a week in advance to have it as part of our thing. It was a long meeting, so maybe that was a good thing. But I'll email you if we want to include it on the next one, and I prepare something.
And to be clear, anybody can submit things to Emma at any point for the agenda. They might not all make it on, but you can certainly submit it. But if it's something that you want to give to her, that it has to be 2 weeks, since we meet every 4 weeks, essentially, 2 weeks from now, because she needs it a week before the agenda goes out, but the agenda goes out a week before the meeting.
Correct.
So it's right square in the middle of the month instead of the first Monday. Okay, is there anything else that anybody would like to see on a future agenda? Not necessarily next time, but Alyssa.
I'd love to hear an update to the post-construction stormwater management, even if it is just who's seeing it next?
Planning Commission.
Planning Commission, what their opinion or recommendation is. I wouldn't propose that we make James or Chuck come in. I just a couple sentences would suffice for me.
Oh, I think we should make him come back. Definitely James. He loves it. Okay. Anything else?
Have we talked about promoting rain gardens to help capture stormwater runoff from residences and businesses and that sort of thing?
In the past, we have talked about
Okay.
that at our farmers market. We've made,
Okay.
and we've had stormwater. It's got stormwater on my brain. We've had rain barrel
Promoting.
workshops
Right.
that we've run. So, and I did see that article in the Herald,
Yes,
and that was
so-
very nice that they had that.
I think it should fall in our realm at some point too. Maybe too late for this year, but You never know.
I have one if anybody, I have an extra one if anybody is in need of one. You know how to get a hold of me. You let Emma know.
Oh, rain barrel?
Yeah.
Speaking of rain barrels, I
This
don't want to
is
create
rain
too much
garden.
more work, but we have talked about how some of the documentation that the public views is difficult to understand. And I would propose that at least at a future meeting, we look at the rain barrel water credit application.
Okay.
Oh, I saw that smile.
We can put that down. And I don't disagree. Okay, anything else for future meetings? Okay then, speaking of future meeting, our next meeting will be on Monday, July 7th. Everybody stay safe on the 4th of July and don't blow any body parts off, please. And with that, I would take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Bye.